Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Clarke, and in this video, I want to show you a few different ways to change the key of a song. Now, there are a couple reasons why you might want to do this. Maybe you're learning a song on the guitar and you plan on singing along to it. Well, every single vocalist has a slightly different vocal range, and if the original singer has a higher vocal range than you, you're probably going to need to lower the key of the song. Alternatively, if they have a lower vocal range than you and you can't quite reach those low notes, well, maybe you need to raise the key of that song. Also, if you plan on playing in any sort of cover band, a lot of the times the vocalist is going to want to change the keys of those songs to best fit their range. Now, the technical term for changing the key of a song is transposition. And transposing a song is actually very, very simple. And there's only a couple things that you need to know. So the first of those is you're going to need to kind of know the note names of the low E and A strings. You don't have to have them all memorized, but you do have to know how to find the notes. This can be as simple as just knowing that this is an open E, from there you go to F sharp, to G sharp, etc. And to make this as painless as possible, you need to be able to do that from both the low E and A strings. The other thing that you need to understand is the difference between half steps and whole steps. And this is just a common way for musicians to communicate the distance between notes, and a half step is just the distance of one fret. So if you were to move the song up a half step, you would be moving it up one fret. Alternatively, a whole step is 2 frets. So if they said, oh, I want to transpose this song down a whole step, you'd be moving down 2 frets. And this also means that sometimes they'll be added together. So you'll hear someone say, okay, we're going to transpose this song up 2.5 steps. Well, that would mean 5 frets. Now, if you've been playing guitar for any amount of time, you should know that there are certain chords that sound good together. And this is usually because they are operating inside of a shared key. So a really common example of this would be chords in the key of G major. You've probably played a G major chord, a C major chord, a D major chord, an E minor chord, and maybe an A minor chord. There's also a B minor chord in there. All of those chords sound good together because they're all inside the key of G major. Alternatively, another common key is the key of C major. And in C major, you're going to have chords like C major, which is shared with G major. You're going to have G major as well, also shared. You're also going to have an A minor, which is also shared, but you're also going to have an F major, which is not shared. This is a different chord, and a chord like a D minor, another chord that is not shared. Then there's also an E minor in there, which is shared. Now, even though these two keys have shared chords, they are different keys, and these chords operate differently inside these different keys. And this basically just comes down to how keys are built, and I don't want to get too deep into it. There's tons of videos on my channel that do cover it, but basically they just get pulled out of a major scale. So if I were to play a G major scale, I'd be playing the notes G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. And each of those notes would have a corresponding chord that fits inside of the key. If I were to play a C major scale, I would have the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then C. And again, these notes would all have corresponding chords inside the key of C major. And what dictates whether these chords are major or minor just has to do with which position they're in the scale. So we just number every note in the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, each one of those numbers has a corresponding major or minor. So the 1, 4, and 5 are major, the 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and the 7 is diminished. That 7th chord barely gets touched, so we're not even going to talk about that diminished chord, but we can do the same thing then in the key of C major, give them numbers as well. So in C, we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then back to the 1 here. And you'll notice that even though those two keys have shared chords, the number that that chord corresponds to is different. For example, that G chord is the 1 chord in the key of G major, but it is also the 5 chord in the key of C major. Now, to illustrate the difference between two keys, I'm gonna play the same chord progression and riff in one key and then the other, and you should be able to tell that they sound like they're far apart from each other, but that I am still technically playing the same thing. And the idea is that one of these might fit one person's voice better, and the other might fit another person's voice better. So in both cases, I played the 6, 4, 1, and 5 chords as my chord progression, but because they're in different keys, the melody that I played had to be transposed to a different key as well. And that kind of acts like how a vocalist would. You could hear that when I played it in the key of G major, I actually had to play it lower. Now that is just to illustrate how two keys are different. We haven't really connected them properly yet, which is what we are going to do next. Now, when we first started talking about changing the key of a song or transposing a key, you probably thought about a capo. And a capo is a super handy tool that essentially allows you to easily move the nut of the guitar up so you can still play in an open position. So for example, if I were to play a C major chord, just like that, and I wanted to move it up a half step, well, I could move this capo up a half step, 1 fret. And now that chord, that C major chord, would have moved up a half step and technically become a C sharp chord. And I could keep going if I wanted, right? I could move up a whole step or 2 half steps, depending on how you want to look at it. And play a C chord again, a C major chord. And now that C major chord would actually be up 2 half steps from that, which would be a D major chord. So when I play the capo 2 and I play this C like this, well, now I'm playing a D major chord. And essentially all you're doing when you use a capo to move the chords of a song up the fretboard is you are just raising the key of the song. So if I'm playing in the key of C major when the capo is off the guitar, right? That would mean if I placed the capo up 1 fret, or 2 frets, let's do 2 frets, and I played the same chords, well, now I'm just playing in the key of D major, right? Because I went up a whole step, so C, C sharp, D. And I could keep going. If I played the same chords up again, well, now what key would I be in? D sharp or E flat. If I kept going, 4th fret, now I'm in E. This would be an E major chord. Even though I'm playing a C major, this would now be an E major chord because I'd be in the key of E major. Alternatively, I can do the exact same thing with my key of G major. So for example, when I play a G major chord, if I were to throw a capo on the 1st fret, well, now I would be playing a G sharp. And if I keep going, as long as you know your musical alphabet, what comes after G sharp, we come back around to an A. So now this, and to illustrate it again, that's an A major chord, right? Doesn't it sound the same as just a regular open A major chord? That's because they are the same chord. The voicing is slightly different, but the actual notes contained inside the chord are the exact same. Now, what starts to confuse people is they think, okay, well, when I'm transposing the key of a song, I assume I have to transpose every chord individually. But the reality is the only thing you really need to pay attention to is the 1 chord. And if we go back to our little numbering system, that's just the very first chord in the key or the chord that shares the same name as the key. So G major in the key of G major or C major in the key of C major. And the only thing that we really need to focus in on is the root note of our 1 chord. And that's just the lowest note of that chord. And if we just look down at the fretboard and let's say someone tells us they want us to play in the key of B major, well, all I need to do is find a B major on my low E or on my A string. In this case, we're gonna go to our low E string and we're gonna find a B note. So if I were to climb all the way up, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp or B flat, and then we get to a B here on the 7th fret. Well, I would just make my G chord so that that low root note of my G, right, is on a B. Now what I would do is I would take my capo and I would place it so that this chord works. And to do that, I would have to place it on the 4th fret, right? So if I play this like this, oh baby, sounds so good. But if I put the capo here, and I could play all the chords in this key, the key of G major, but with the capo here, sometimes capos mess with your tuning a little bit, so it's not perfectly tight, but I would be playing in the key of B major now because the root note of my 1 chord is a B note. We don't have to worry about transposing all those other chords. We just have to know the number that they are, and we know we can play them. Now I can do the exact same thing using the chords from the key of C major as well, instead of using the chords from G major. And this would allow us to go up our A string. So for example, if I wanted to look at the key of E major, I want to play in the key of E major. Well, to make a G major chord shape in E major, it's either off the fretboard altogether behind the nut, which is not going to work, or it's all the way up on the 12th fret like this, and my capo would then have to go on my 9th fret, which is just totally unrealistic. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to count up the notes until we find an E on the A string, because obviously that's going to be lower down the fretboard. So we've got A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, and then we've got our E. So now we've arrived at our E note right here, and we just make a C major chord shape, making sure that that note is the lowest note of our C chord. Right? Now, I'm gonna need to place my capo, and for the capo to make sense, it just has to be put in the position that would make this chord shape make sense if it were down here. So in this case, I would have to put it on the 4th fret, and if I put my capo on the 4th fret, then my C shape will make sense with the open strings, just like that. But because this note right here is an E, then this becomes an E major chord. And if I played the chords from the key of C major, so things like C, G, A minor, F, D minor, E minor, F, C, all nice chords from the key of C major, well, because of where this position is, it becomes the key of E major. And now what you can do is, using the chords from these keys, the chords in the key of G major and the chords in the key of C major, you can play in any key. On top of that, you can also just use your capo to nudge up or down a key as well. For example, if you had a song that originally was in the key of G major and you needed to lower that song, well, a lot of people would assume you need to lower the tuning of your guitar because you can't go any lower with those shapes. Well, let's say I want to move it down one whole step. So from a G to an F. Well, these shapes no longer work for us, but what we can do is we can find an F on the A string all the way up here on the 8th fret, put my capo in the correct position for this key, and now I can use my C chord shapes to essentially have lowered, even though I'm going up the fretboard, I've essentially lowered the key of the song by a whole step, because my one chord would now be an F. That would mean it's the same thing as playing an F chord down there, but I can use all nice open chord shapes that I'm comfortable with. So let's say you're going to learn a song and you are not sure what key that song is in. It's not using nice, happy G major, C major, D major, E minor chords. It's not using chords from the key of C major as well, so you're not quite sure. Now I have a video that covers this stuff way more in depth. You can feel free to check it out. It'll be linked in the description. But basically the quick version is, to find the key of a song, there's always going to be a matching major scale that fits over the song somewhere. So you have to learn some sort of major scale shape. There are a bunch of different ones you can use. You can use this one, and you can do the same shape on the A string. A lot of times I'll teach the one higher up. That's just a very simple major scale. And what you can do is, as a song is playing, you can play the major scale up and down your fretboard, something like that, until you find a position that fits. It just sounds like all the notes sound like they could work inside the key, because that major scale in one spot on your fretboard is going to work in 99% of songs cases, other than like really complicated stuff. There is going to be a major scale that corresponds to the key of the song that you are trying to learn. And then once you find the scale that matches up, using your ears and being very, very careful that every single note does fit the song, then all you need to know is the name of the note that the scale started on. So if I started the scale on this note here, and that was the one that fit the song that I was playing it over, well, that note that I started on is a B note. So then I know that the song is in the key of B major. And then I can implement the things that we learned earlier in this lesson, which is essentially just play G major chords on top of that B, put my capo on, and then all of a sudden all the chords in that song are going to be accessible to you because they're going to be one of those chords from the key of G major while it's capoed on the 4th fret so that it fits into the key of B major. Even if a song is in a minor key, so if the song really feels very minory, it's kind of more of a sad feeling chord progression and it really pulls towards a minor chord, there is still going to be a major scale that fits on top. It's called a relative major scale. And that's still going to give you the relative major key, which is still going to give you the correct overall chords to be able to play. I don't want to dig too deep into the relative major and minor keys. The important thing is just knowing that you can relate everything back to a major key and the chords will all work. The theory behind all the stuff we've talked about so far is pretty interesting. It really does all come back to the numbers of those chords, and that is really what you're dealing with, is the 1 chord, the 5 chord, the 6 chord, the 4 chord. When we call out those numbers, that's just how those chords operate inside of the key. And if you see a bunch of chords from a different key, well, those chords will all have numbers inside of that key as well. So if you were to find that the key of a song was in B major, well, the chords in that key would line up with the notes inside of this scale. So we'd have a B, a C sharp, a D sharp, an A, an F sharp, a G sharp, an A sharp, before we get back to a B. Now, those are all some pretty nasty chords. If you're trying to play regular open chord shapes, that's just not going to work. But if you do see those chords on a chord chart or something like that, and you can relate them back to the key of B major, well, you can figure out the number that those chords are. And then when you go to play in a new key, so when you throw your capo on, you can do the same thing. For example, when I play a B major, I'm just going to play bar chord versions right now, to an F sharp major, to a G sharp minor, to an E major, that is technically, because of the way that the B major scale works, B major would be my 1 chord, F sharp major would be my 5 chord, G sharp minor would be my 6, and then E major would be my 4. So that means I could play a 1, 5, 6, 4 using different chord shapes, be playing the same song, but in a new key. So let's say I wanted to move the key of that song up or down. I'm in the key of B major. Let's say I wanted to play the same song, but I wanted to move it up to the key of D major. So B major to C major to C sharp major to D major, going up 1.5 steps or 3 half steps. Well, what I would want to do is, first of all, I'd want to find where I'm going to play those shapes. So D major, the easiest place, you can play it here with G shapes, capo up here, or, because that's a D note, or I could find a D note here, and I could capo with my C shapes, so just capo 2, and I can play 1, 5, 6, and 4 using my C shapes, because they are literally the same chords operating the same way inside of the key. But now I'm playing in the key of D major, playing those same chords. I've moved my song up into a new key. And on top of that, I'm not having to play these nasty bar chord shapes. At the end of the day, it just comes down to finding that root note of the 1 chord and deciding whether you want to play it on the low E string or on the low A string. And then if you want to move that up or move that down or move it into a totally different key, you can do that. Now, for those of you that are comfortable with bar chords, we have it way, way easier because the patterns themselves will never change. And I cover this in videos about something I call the chord roadmaps. We're not going to really worry too much about that. So if you know it, cool. If you don't, this is basically what it is. And that is, again, finding the root notes of whatever key I'm in. So if I'm in the key of G major, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to find a G. So that is a G right there. And my chord roadmap using bar chords, because this is where we're going to get into these bar chords, I can know where my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 chords are just based on a simple pattern or a roadmap. So if I start here and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, just like that, that is all of my chords inside the key of G major. And if I played that with bar chords, so these are just E, and A shape bar chords. These are the basic bar chord shapes that everybody learns. So you do have to learn these to be able to do this, but I can play. Diminished shape. Again, we're not going to worry about that. All the rest of the chords, the 1 through the 6th, are shapes that are really easy to access. Now, because I'm using bar chords, I don't even have to worry about using a capo. If I want to go into a different key, I can just move those bar chord shapes up or down the fretboard. So if I wanted to raise the key of this song, let's say up a whole step, well, in G major, I just move everything up 2 frets. The shapes all stay the same, everything stays the same. My roadmap just shifts up the fretboard. And just like with the open chords and capo idea, it's all about just lining up that 1 chord root note with whatever key you're in. But we can also do the same thing with a second roadmap, just like we used the key of C major and the chords from the key of C major, where we found the root note of the 1 chord on the A string. Well, we have a roadmap that sits there as well. So let's say we wanted to go to the key of D major. We find a D note right here. So on the 5th fret, if we count it up, but basically it looks like this. So now we go 1, 2, 3, and then we have to go for 4, we go down and back 2. So our 1 is here, 2, 3, then down and back 2 from our 1 is our 4. 4, 5, 6, 7. So again, they're nicely lined up, but it does kind of shift things a little bit because we are going down on the string instead of up the strings. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7 before returning to our 1 chord. And to move this chord roadmap into a different key, instead of finding that low root note on our low E string, we're just gonna find that low root note on our A string. So if I wanted to go to the key of F sharp major, let's say. Well, I can find an F sharp, A string, go all the way up. F sharp is on the 9th fret, and I could play my roadmap right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It becomes very, very easy to move around into different keys because the shapes themselves don't change. And again, as long as you're paying attention to those numbers, even if you want to go from one roadmap and you want to transpose all the way into a different key that has to use a different roadmap, it's still very easy to do. And then once you learn these roadmaps, it's actually easy to go to a capoed key as well. And you can kind of have the freedom to be like, do I want to play capoed G major key shapes? Do I want to play capoed C major key shapes? Do I want to use chord roadmap 1, chord roadmap 2? You have all these options. So that's going to be it for this lesson. I do have a ton of videos on very similar topics and concepts to this one all over my channel. So if that's something that interests you, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. Also, if you like this video specifically, make sure you hit the thumbs up button as well. If there are any parts that were confusing or maybe you have any questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments below and I'll make sure to go down there and answer them. With all that said, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next one.